Hey there, survival family. Welcome back to the channel where we tackle the hard truths about preparedness that others won't. Today we're diving deep into what might be the most devastating disaster scenario of our modern age, an electromagnetic pulse attack. Imagine this. You're scrolling through your phone on an otherwise normal Tuesday afternoon when suddenly, without warning, everything goes dark. Your phone dies, your car stalls out, the streetlights fade to black, and within minutes, an entire nation built on instant gratification gets catapulted back to the 1800s. That's the stark reality of a large-scale EMP event. Whether it comes from a high-altitude nuclear detonation, a hostile nation with an E-bomb, or even a massive solar storm hitting Earth just right. The scary truth? Most people won't make it through the aftermath. But you're not most people, are you? That's why you're here, getting educated before disaster strikes. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss potentially life-saving information like what I'm about to share. And stick around until the end because I'll be giving you a free downloadable checklist of the top 10 EMP-specific preps you need to start today. Let's get into it. Before we talk survival tactics, let's make sure we all understand exactly what we're up against with an EMP. An electromagnetic pulse is basically a massive surge of energy that induces destructive electrical currents in anything with wires, circuits, or transformers, which in today's world is pretty much everything we depend on. There are three main types of EMPs we need to worry about, and each one comes with its own specific dangers. First, there's the high-altitude nuclear burst, or HEMP, which would be detonated anywhere from 25 to 400 miles above the United States. The terrifying part about this scenario is that a single well-placed weapon could blanket most of the continental U.S. with these damaging electromagnetic fields. The 2004 Congressional EMP Commission didn't pull any punches when they warned that a successful EMP strike could potentially kill the majority of Americans within a year, not from the explosion itself, but from the cascading infrastructure failures that would follow when everything electronic stops working at once. The second threat vector is a coronal mass ejection, or CME, which is basically a massive eruption of plasma from the sun. History has already shown us what these can do. Back in 1859, the Carrington event hit Earth with such force that telegraph lines sparked and operators could send messages with their batteries completely disconnected, and that was with 19th century technology. Our modern electrical grid, loaded with billions of sensitive transistors and thousands of miles of transmission lines, is exponentially more vulnerable to this kind of solar tantrum. The third possibility is localized non-nuclear EMP devices, sometimes called E-bombs. Military forces already use these to disable enemy electronics, and it's not hard to imagine terrorist groups deploying smaller versions against data centers or regional grid nodes. While these wouldn't take down the entire country at once, they could still create devastating regional blackouts that cascade into wider systems failures. Each of these threats varies in intensity, geographic coverage, and warning time, but they all share one brutal characteristic: speed. Within nanoseconds, transformers would fry. Within seconds, control centers would go dark, and within minutes, everything built on those systems would collapse in sequence. This isn't a slow-moving hurricane you can outrun or a pandemic with an incubation period. When an EMP hits, you're already in the middle of the disaster before you even know what happened. Let's walk through what those first terrifying minutes would actually look like on the ground. The electricity disappears with absolutely no visible cause. Most vehicles built after the mid-90s stall out almost immediately because their engine control units and ignition circuits get overloaded. Cellular towers fail as their backup batteries drain rapidly, fighting against the induced currents. Air traffic control radar screens black out, hospital ventilators freeze in place, and millions of homes experience what I call simultaneous appliance death. Everything from your smart fridge to your furnace controls just stops working. The psychological shock of this universal silence is immediate and deeply destabilizing. Imagine the quietest moment you've ever experienced, then multiply it across an entire city. No hum of air conditioners, no distant traffic noise, no music or TV sounds spilling from buildings, just an eerie silence that immediately primes the population for panic. Energy experts have pointed out that losing even 10% of grid load by surprise can crash an entire regional network, and an EMP threatens far higher instantaneous knockout levels. Within these first 30 minutes, the lucky ones are those with older vehicles that still run, those who happen to be near their homes rather than trapped in elevators or subway tunnels, and those who immediately recognize what's happening instead of waiting for emergency alerts that will never come. As we move from the first hour into the first full day, the cascading failures begin to accelerate at a truly terrifying pace. With no grid power heartbeat, water utilities stop pumping as soon as their diesel generators run dry, which means no water pressure coming through your taps. Wastewater starts backing up into low-lying drains, creating immediate health hazards. Refineries can't move crude oil through their cracked pumps, and the entire just-in-time food pipeline halts at every single point where a microchip controls a valve, a conveyor belt, a gate, or even something as simple as a barcode scanner. And let's be real about our food supply. Grocery stores already run on razor-thin inventories, with the average city holding roughly 3 days of food under absolutely ideal conditions. These are not ideal conditions. Law enforcement communications collapse alongside 911 networks. Police cruisers with older analog ignitions might still run, but their digital radios are compromised, forcing officers to coordinate by shouting to each other or trying to use personal cell phones that no longer function. That uniformed presence that normally reassures a nervous public dwindles by the hour as officers can't coordinate responses or even receive calls for help. Hospitals quickly transform from places of healing into death traps. Modern ventilators, infusion pumps, and automated medication cabinets freeze up. Elevators trap staff and patients between floors. Even when backup generators do successfully start, they're only designed for short blackouts and will consume their stored diesel in 2 to 3 days, and the replacement fuel deliveries they're counting on will never arrive. For anyone with acute medical needs, the countdown to crisis has already begun. By day 2, the reality starts sinking in for city dwellers as they discover that their tap water has completely stopped flowing. Toilets can no longer flush, refrigeration is gone, and gas station pumps are dead. Even those who were smart enough to keep cash on hand find it essentially useless because point-of-sale systems require power to function. What starts as panic buying quickly mutates into widespread looting, first for essentials like bottled water and canned goods, then eventually for anything that might be tradable on the improvised barter markets that spring up. Government emergency stockpiles that were supposed to feed local populations during disasters turn out to be extremely limited and geographically sparse. Even FEMA's own contingency planning documents admit that their supply chains for mass feeding programs assume functioning highways and intact communications, both of which would be completely absent in an EMP aftermath. And as rumors spread faster than facts through word of mouth, civil order begins to erode dramatically. This is when you start seeing ad hoc militia patrols appearing to guard apartment blocks in urban areas or rural crossroads in the countryside. The loss of communications creates information deserts where nobody knows what's happening even a few miles away. Is the government responding? Has power been restored in the next county over? Is help on the way? Without answers, fear festers and people make decisions based on worst-case assumptions. By the end of the first week, the social fabric that holds communities together starts tearing at the seams as trust evaporates and survival instincts kick in. As we move into weeks 2 and 3, we witness what I can only describe as the death of modernity itself. Without refrigeration, 100% of perishable food is spoiled, creating not just hunger, but also a public health crisis, as millions of pounds of rotting food attract vermin and spread disease. Livestock and industrial farms die from heat, dehydration, or starvation when their automated feed and cooling systems fail. All that grain stored in silos can't be milled without electric motors. And the chlorination plants lying idle mean that any city water still available has essentially become a pathogen cocktail. Petroleum refining is completely offline, so the fuel sitting in underground tanks becomes a finite, dwindling resource. Once generators and agricultural machinery run dry, nearly every mechanized survival tool we've come to depend on simply disappears. Medical supply chains break down completely, insulin stocks perish without refrigeration, antibiotics degrade, and trauma care reverts to what amounts to Civil War-era field surgery conditions. Historical modeling suggests something truly sobering. Starvation, exposure, disease, and violence will claim the majority of urban populations within this 3-month window. This isn't alarmist speculation. These are scenarios described in multiple EMP Commission briefings to the highest levels of government. The hard truth is that a society built entirely on just-in-time delivery systems and computerized infrastructure simply cannot function when those systems vanish overnight. By month 3, we're not talking about an inconvenience or even a traditional disaster. We're talking about the collapse of the entire system that sustains modern human life in dense population centers. When power, food, and law all evaporate simultaneously, survival defaults to what I call the rule of reality, focusing exclusively on the primal essentials that keep human beings alive. First and foremost is water. You need immediate access to at least 1 gallon per person per day, plus redundant purification methods including gravity filters, calcium hypochlorite for chemical treatment, and the ability to boil water when needed. After an EMP, city water cannot be trusted once pressure loss allows contaminants to seep into the system. Security becomes an immediate priority, with opportunistic violence increasing in direct proportion to population density. Layered defense starts with hardened doors, window bars or boards, blackout curtains to prevent light signatures at night, radio-free communication signals like whistles or visual codes, and round-the-clock watch rotations for your family or group. Shelter and warmth replace your dependence on thermostats and electric furnaces. Wood stoves, kerosene heaters, and heavy-duty thermal coverings for windows become literal lifesavers, especially in northern climates where winter temperatures can kill faster than hunger. For food, focus on shelf-stable calories, grains, beans, freeze-dried meals, lard, honey, which actually become a form of currency in a grid-down scenario. Gardens require non-hybrid seeds that will reproduce true-to-type and manual tools that don't need power. Any livestock you keep will demand careful fodder planning since you can't just run to the feed store. Medicine becomes a critical concern as pharmacies close and prescriptions can't be refilled. You need to build at least a 6-month cache of any critical medications family members require. Store broad-spectrum antibiotics if you can legally acquire them, wound care supplies sufficient for serious injuries, and even morale-boosting basics like caffeine and electrolyte packets that help maintain both physical and psychological resilience. These aren't suggestions or good ideas. They're the absolute baseline requirements for staying alive when every system we rely on vanishes at once. The rule of reality doesn't care about your retirement plans or whether you think this scenario is likely. It only cares about whether you've prepared for these 5 core needs before they become impossible to address. One of the most hotly debated topics in EMP preparedness is whether you should bug in at your primary residence or bug out to a secondary location. After an EMP strike, this decision becomes dramatically more complicated because highways will essentially lock up as immobilized vehicles strangle every lane. Trying to trek out on foot exposes families to both the desperation of others and the risk of ambush by those who quickly figure out that travelers likely carry supplies. Most experienced preppers therefore choose to bug in unless they already maintain a fully stocked retreat property that's reachable by off-road paths or secondary routes. A defensible home with water access, stored fuel, and community allies simply offers the highest survival odds for most people. The familiar environment also provides psychological comfort during extremely stressful times, and you'll have all your supplies already in place rather than only what you could carry. If you absolutely must relocate after an EMP, you need to have planned multiple alternate routes, supply caches along those routes, and non-electronic navigation methods established well before disaster strikes. This isn't something you can improvise on the fly when every road is jammed with dead vehicles and desperate people. The golden rule here is brutal but true. If you haven't already prepared your bug-out location and practiced getting there under adverse conditions, bugging in is almost always the better survival choice in an EMP scenario. Let's talk about the preparations specifically tailored to an EMP event that differ from general disaster readiness. The first critical prep is Faraday protection for your essential electronics. Wrap critical devices in 2 layers of heavy aluminum foil separated by cardboard. Then store them inside a 20-gallon steel trash can with a tight-fitting lid. Multiple tests have confirmed that these nested conductive barriers dramatically reduce field strength and can protect sensitive electronics from most EMP scenarios. Next, you need to replace electric tools with manual alternatives. Swap electric saws for crosscut saws, cordless drills for hand braces, food processors for hand-cranked grain mills. These aren't just backup tools. In a post-EMP world, they become your only tools. For power workarounds, small-scale solar panels tied to DC LED lighting and low-draw radio chargers will dramatically outperform gas generators that will sit useless once fuel supplies are exhausted. Focus on 12-volt DC systems that can run directly from batteries without requiring inverters. Communications become critical for situational awareness, so store handheld ham or GMRS radios plus reference guides in your Faraday cage. A small roll-up J-pole antenna and plenty of spare batteries enable short-range neighborhood coordination when all other comms are down. For transportation, older diesel vehicles with minimal electronics, particularly those from the pre-1980s era, have the best survival odds. Keep spare starters, alternators, and glow plug relays in metallic shielding. And consider converting at least one vehicle to mechanical points ignition if you have the technical skills to do so. These EMP-specific preparations form a unique layer of resilience that standard disaster prep doesn't address. They acknowledge the particular vulnerability of electronic systems and create workarounds that don't depend on the grid or complex supply chains to function. Each one addresses a specific weakness that an EMP would exploit, creating islands of capability in a sea of technological devastation. The harsh reality of a post-EMP world is that desperate populations will target anyone perceived to have supplies. This makes defense and community formation not optional extras, but core survival requirements. You need to harden your perimeter with physical barriers like thorn hedges, motion chimes powered by mechanical springs, overlapping fields of observation, and concealed fallback positions in case your primary defense is breached. A lone family, no matter how well armed, is easy prey for determined groups. But a disciplined block-wide coalition controlling a neighborhood choke point becomes a serious deterrent to opportunistic raiders. Shared watch rotations free individuals to rest properly, and pooled labor dramatically accelerates essential projects like gardening, woodcutting, and sanitation work. Community building needs to start long before disaster strikes. Get to know your neighbors now, identify those with useful skills like medical training, mechanical aptitude, or security backgrounds, and begin forming those relationships of trust. In a crisis, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your level of preparation, and that includes social preparation. The communities that survive long-term after an EMP will be those that quickly establish fair rules, shared responsibilities, and mutual protection pacts while maintaining enough flexibility to adapt as conditions change. If you make it through the first 3 months after an EMP, your focus must shift from immediate life support to sustainable subsistence for the long haul. Establish high-yield gardens using heirloom seeds, focusing on calorie-dense staples like potatoes and winter squash that give you the most nutrition for your labor investment. Convert every south-facing wall into a passive solar dehydrator to preserve harvests without power. Construct rocket mass heaters from brick and stovepipe that slash fuel consumption by up to 80% compared to conventional wood stoves. Sanitation becomes a life-or-death issue in the absence of municipal systems. Dig 2-stage human manure composting pits at least 200 feet from any water source. Line them with lime and carbon-rich straw to accelerate pathogen breakdown and prevent contamination of groundwater. Replace disposable hygiene products with washable cloth alternatives. Make soap from wood ash lye, and switch to reusable straight razors that don't require replacement cartridges. The key to long-term adaptation is designing systems that don't require inputs you can't produce yourself. Every dependency on something you have to scavenge or trade for represents a potential failure point in your survival plan. The goal is to gradually transform from a consumer of stored supplies into a producer of essential resources, creating closed-loop systems that can sustain themselves indefinitely with minimal outside inputs. In a post-EMP landscape, currency quickly reverts to tangible assets with real-world utility. Salt, spices, medical consumables, ammunition in common calibers, alcohol, and most importantly, mechanical expertise. The time to acquire trade skills is now, before disaster forces a crash course under life or death pressure. Focus on abilities like small engine repair, herbal medicine, leatherworking, and blacksmithing that directly address essential needs without requiring complex infrastructure. A functioning grain mill or a water wheel rigged alternator can literally anchor a microeconomy in the ruins of the grid. People will bring their grain or batteries for miles around if you can provide services they can't replicate themselves. Skills that seem quaintly old-fashioned today, candle making, rope braiding, fermentation, become cornerstone industries when industrial production collapses. The most valuable commodities in this environment aren't gold or silver, but consumables that improve quality of life. Pain relievers, antibiotics, seasoning agents, and chemical light sources. The prepared survivor positions themselves to produce or repair items with daily utility, creating value exchanges that strengthen community bonds while securing their own position within the new economic web. Here's something too many preppers overlook. Survival is much more than calories and caliber count. Boredom, grief, and survivor's guilt fracture group cohesion faster than starvation in many cases. The psychological dimension of long-term crisis requires deliberate planning, just like your water supply. Stock non-electronic entertainment options, including card decks, musical instruments, printed books, and even hand-cranked phonographs that provide cultural continuity when digital entertainment vanishes. Implement daily routines with purposeful labor, followed by structured downtime, communal meals, and morale-building rituals. Whether that's prayer for religious groups, storytelling traditions, or ceremonial guard changes that reinforce the community's commitment to mutual protection. These seemingly small psychological supports prevent the despair that leads to rash decisions or community breakdown. The mind navigates crisis through narrative, the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening and why it matters. Communities that maintain a forward-looking narrative about rebuilding rather than just surviving will outperform groups fixated solely on immediate threats. Cultivate storytellers and meaning makers alongside your gardeners and guards. They preserve the humanity that makes survival worthwhile in the first place. Many Americans assume that government response to a catastrophic EMP would be swift and comprehensive. The reality is far more sobering. Even optimistic Department of Energy models concede that replacing a single large power transformer takes months under perfect conditions with functioning supply chains. The United States has minimal domestic manufacturing capacity for these critical components and relies heavily on overseas suppliers. Simultaneously replacing hundreds of transformers damaged by an EMP is logistically impossible inside a year, even with total government mobilization. There are emerging grid hardening initiatives. The Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnerships Program has directed billions toward EMP-class surge protectors, but coverage remains fractional at best, protecting only the most critical infrastructure nodes rather than the distribution network that serves homes and businesses. Citizens should realistically expect highly fragmented federal aid, selective National Guard deployments concentrated around critical infrastructure or political centers, ration lines guarded by armed escorts, and curfews justified by emergency powers. Many rural zones will see little to no assistance as resources are triaged to population centers or strategic assets. This isn't conspiracy theorizing. It's the logical outcome of limited resources being allocated according to strategic priorities during an unprecedented crisis. Understanding these limitations isn't an indictment of government intentions, but a clear-eyed assessment of capacity constraints in an EMP scenario. True recovery begins locally, not with grand national restoration projects. Small hydro installations on irrigation canals, windmills rerouted to power belt-driven alternators, stationary bike generators, biodiesel from waste cooking oil, methane digesters fed by livestock manure. These become the building blocks of resilient microgrids that don't depend on the national infrastructure healing itself. Communities that create a rugged 12-volt DC backbone for LED lighting and radio communications will dramatically outpace those passively awaiting national restoration. A neighborhood solar array charging a battery bank that powers a community center becomes an island of capability in a sea of darkness. Collaboration with amateur radio networks forms a skeletal internet of voice relays, passing essential trade and security information from region to region. Every survivor household should master basic soldering, battery reclamation from spent laptop cells, and improvised voltage regulation using scavenged Zener diodes. These seemingly technical skills become the foundation of a new, more resilient infrastructure built from the components of the old. The microgrids that emerge won't resemble the seamless power we take for granted today. They'll be intermittent, capacity-constrained, and maintenance-intensive. But they'll provide enough functionality to preserve critical knowledge, enable basic healthcare, and maintain the communication channels necessary for broader coordination and eventual rebuilding. The seeds of the new grid grow in the shell of the old. Let's bring all this down to earth with specific actions you need to take, starting today. First, place 2 shortwave or ham radio handhelds, a backup solar charger, and a thumb drive library of survival manuals inside a double-layer Faraday container. These become your information lifeline when all other sources go silent. Store 90 days of potable water or develop the ability to harvest and purify from a nearby source that won't disappear in a crisis. Remember, urban water systems fail completely without grid power. Build a 6-month shelf-stable pantry focused on calories per cubic inch. Think rice, beans, pasta, and oils. Then rotate that stock every 6 months to keep it fresh. Food becomes both survival necessity and valuable trade good. Acquire at least one pre-1990 diesel or gasoline vehicle with minimal electronics and shield crucial spare parts in metal containers. Transportation that functions when others are stranded creates enormous strategic advantage. Harden your home entry points with 3-inch screws in all strike plates, exterior window bars or shutters, and interior blackout drapes that prevent light signatures at night from broadcasting your preparedness. Form a 5-family mutual aid group. Practice radio communications regularly, share tool redundancy to reduce individual costs, and drill night watch protocols before you need them under stress. Map alternate routes out of town that cross railroad corridors and drainage easements instead of clogged highways. Knowledge of these secondary pathways could mean the difference between escape and entrapment. Teach every family member how to operate without electronics, compass navigation, mechanical water pumping, manual food preparation, and basic first aid. These skills transform dependents into contributors during crisis. An EMP strike is simultaneously a technological catastrophe and a human crisis. The lights vanish in an instant, but what kills in the months afterward is a toxic combination of fragile infrastructure, lack of foresight, and social fracture. By grounding your preparations in water security, layered defense, tangible skills, and community alliances, you transform from potential victim to stabilizing force, while others flail in the dark. Store knowledge printed on paper that survives when screens go black. Protect strategic electronics with layered shielding. Cultivate calories in the soil rather than depending on the supply chain. And embed yourself in a network of resolute neighbors who understand what's at stake. That resolve, backed by practical action taken before crisis hits, is how you light a path through the silent, lawless night that follows an EMP and emerge not merely alive, but ready to rebuild something worthy on the other side. If this video helped you understand the EMP threat more clearly, please hit that like button and share it with someone you care about. As promised, I've created a downloadable PDF checklist of the top 10 EMP-specific preps you need to start today. You'll find the link in the description below. And if you want to dive deeper into specific aspects of EMP preparation, let me know in the comments which topic you'd like me to tackle next. Until next time, stay prepared and stay resilient.